are listening to the CareersBU podcast, the podcast aimed at Bournemouth University students and graduates. Each episode, we talk to employers, alumni and professionals all about their career journey, what employers are looking for, and help you explore the opportunities that are available to you. Hello and welcome to this episode. I'm Amanda Fripp, Careers Advisor at BU. Today I chat to Ellen Logan. She's a Senior Consultant at Gradconsult. Ellen has been involved in many recruitment campaigns in early careers, and in today's episode, she provides an insider's view of what recruiters are looking for. We chat about the early stages of the application process, including CVs, applications, as well as applicant tracking systems. Okay, welcome Ellen to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on today. Can you just introduce yourself and where you're from, please?
Yeah, of course. So thank you for having me. So my name's Ellen Logan. I'm a senior consultant for a company called Gradconsult. I'm actually from Bournemouth originally, so it's lovely to kind of be on this podcast and supporting students at Bournemouth University. My brother is actually currently doing a master's at Bournemouth University.
Amazing.
So I have a very, very strong connection to BU and Bournemouth generally. But I actually moved away from Bournemouth when I was 18. I went up to Sheffield, which is where I live now, to study politics and philosophy. And then, like lots of people in careers, my career did not go in the way that I thought it would. I fell into higher education and graduate labour market and kind of recruitment, I suppose, through that. Working for a company called Prospects in Manchester for a long time, where I worked on graduate labour market research. I then did a graduate programme myself at the University of Manchester, where I was leading on a variety of projects across different departments, running projects from start to finish. And then I joined the Gradconsult team in 2019, and I've been working for them since then, really, on and off. I had a 2-year gap where I did a bit of travelling and working as a freelancer and remotely from my van in Europe, but I'm back.
What were you doing from your van?
So I was actually supporting recruitment campaigns. So as long as you've got a computer and Wi-Fi, you can do work really from wherever these days. I delivered a multi-day conference for Lush, an ethical consumer, as well as supporting Gradconsult, who obviously I'm working for now full-time, with careers development and also recruitment. So a slightly interesting kind of turn in my career, getting to work remotely and travel whilst I was doing it, which was a really amazing experience. But I'm now back working as a senior consultant for Gradconsult based in Sheffield, but travel around the country quite a lot, essentially talking to people like you, working with students, with graduates, discussing the key skills they need to help them get into jobs and what the kind of the labour market looks like.
Excellent. You've had a really interesting career so far, haven't you? And it obviously hasn't been particularly linear, which is, again, quite normal.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things that I actually really encourage people. I think we're moving away from linear careers, actually. And we always talk about seizing upon the unexpected and actually being open to new opportunities. And actually, that's a really key skill. I think we can map out our careers and in this very linear way, but actually often that doesn't work out. And especially if you're doing subjects, like myself, I did politics and philosophy. I'm not a politician. There are, some people went into politics, but actually it's about the skills that you develop from those types of jobs. Actually, you can go almost anywhere. And I think having that openness to explore and try new things is really critical in terms of developing new skills and actually finding amazing opportunities. So I always encourage people, try something new. And you never know where you're going to end up.
Yeah, great bit of advice there. So you're working for Gradconsult. So as an organisation, what does Gradconsult do?
So Gradconsult is an independent consultancy company that essentially bridges the gap between universities and the world of employment. So from the university point of view, we work with most universities in the UK, supporting students and graduates with learning and developing the kind of the really key skills that they need to get great jobs, and also supporting them through recruitment processes, giving them the information, the key skills and information that they need to really perform well in a recruitment campaign. But we also work with careers services as well. So we support in terms of learning and development for career services and senior team. And we also support sometimes in terms of development of strategy. So what kind of key strategy, key focuses for career services to really support their students and their graduates in the best possible way. But we also work with employers. So we work in terms of learning and development with companies themselves, so supporting them to support their staff and develop effective strategies to do this. But we also run large-scale recruitment campaigns on behalf of companies. We also support companies in developing their early career programs and early kind of learning and development programs. So an example of that might be we're working with Vinted. Loads of people have got the Vinted app at the moment. We're supporting them with their early careers development program, so supporting their graduate program and their intern program. So it's really, really varied, but it's a lot around that recruitment and early careers support, as well as that high level strategy in terms of learning and development.
Excellent. So yeah, a whole variety of different projects going on. It sounds really interesting. And I get that's kind of why I asked you to come onto the podcast, wasn't it? Because actually what I thought it would be really good to be talking about is those application processes in the early career sector. So for, what sort of application stages do graduates go through, and also how best to make the best application. So we're going to be focusing hopefully today on kind of the CVs, the applications, those kind of initial stage of the application process. But obviously you're so experienced in graduate recruitment, and you said you run recruitment campaigns. What stages does a graduate typically go through as part of a graduate recruitment process?
Yeah, of course. So it can really vary. So the recruitment processes that we typically run, there tends to be the initial application stage, which is normally a CV uploading. There might be a cover letter, but quite often for us, it's about CV screening. So there'll be a CV. We then often progress graduates then through next to a video interview. So video interviews are used, they're quite popular. Now that could be a live video interview where you have an employer and you're face to face with an employer and they ask you live questions, but quite often it's actually pre-recorded video interviews. So the questions are there, you get to read them, you then have 30 seconds or 60 seconds to come up with an answer, which you then record live. Occasionally you have an opportunity to re-record and have a couple of goes, but often that's done live again to see how you perform under pressure. And then we often use assessment centres. Assessment centres are a really popular tool in most graduate recruitment processes, I would say. And then we would progress through to a final interview. So typically that's our stages. It's those kind of 4 stages: the CV uploading, the video interview, the assessment centre, and then a final interview. And with most graduate recruitment processes, typically you kind of cut down by about a third at each stage. So obviously the first stage, which is typically uploading a CV, is the one that we as a recruiter don't have as much control over. So you actually often have no idea how many applications are going to come through. It could be hundreds, it could be a handful. So for us as a recruiter, it's really unpredictable. But also for graduates, that first stage is often statistically the most competitive. And then normally we would be going down the funnel. So say we were looking to hire about 4 graduates, you would be going up maybe a third at each stage. So you might be expecting around 50 or so for a video interview, 30 to 50. It can, again, really varies. Then maybe for the assessment centre, you'd be looking between 10 to 20. Again, it really depends on how many people you're looking to recruit. And then you'd probably be narrowing it down to try to get 5 to 8 people to a final interview. So that, I would say, is quite a typical graduate recruitment funnel, we call it. But again, as I said, the most competitive stage statistically is that initial stage where you could be competing against hundreds. I mean, actually, I always say this when I speak to graduates: if you get through to an assessment centre, you've actually beaten out most people at that point. So statistically, you've got a far better chance of getting the job. And actually, quite often, you'll be, there's several people being hired, so your chances are even more likely. So that's quite a typical recruitment process. Again, that it varies from company to company, depending on the job, depending on the skills that they're looking for. But I suppose that would be quite a typical one, where we'd be looking for key competencies and skills such as, professionalism and teamwork, and communication. Those are kind of skills. Resilience is another really key one. So often graduate recruiters are looking for those key skills and competencies, and then using a recruitment process to really try to pull those out from a candidate and see how they would perform in a job with those types of skills.
Okay. And I think it's good to note that, like you said, it does vary by employers. A lot of graduate schemes will have that process. I see it quite a lot, the video interview, the assessment centre. I see some employers that don't actually ask for a CV initially. I have seen employers that they say that you fill in a very basic application form. It's not even like it's just the kind of basic questions. And then everyone gets invited for a video interview. So I have seen that as well. But, in your experience from when you're recruiting for different employers, typically they are asking for CVs, are they?
Typically in companies that I'm working for and that we're supporting, a CV is a really effective way of getting those key skills and seeing, do you have the key essential skills and criteria in order to progress you through to the next stage of the process. Ultimately, it's about filtering out the best candidates, and a CV is still one of the best tools for doing that at that initial stage. So it's a really common one still in recruitment processes. But as we said, it really varies company to company. Some companies have huge amounts of resource as well. And other companies, I've worked a lot with small to medium-sized businesses. They don't have as much resource and kind of manpower in terms of assessing. So again, it's looking for the best tools for them as a recruiter to try to find and filter out the best candidate for the job. And CVs are still really, really popular tool for that.
And I guess for a student or for a graduate applying, it's all about reading the instructions, following the instructions. What are they asking for? Do you need to be uploading a CV, a cover letter, or is it an application form, and just following those instructions? So we'll talk about what you look for in a CV, which you've kind of mentioned about. What I just want to touch on as well is applicant tracking systems. So there's a lot online about applicant tracking systems and how to make a CV that's ATS friendly. But do you use applicant tracking systems?
Yeah, we have used applicant tracking systems. So essentially it's a software or a system that recruiters and employers can use to track candidates through a recruitment process. They're a really effective tool for making recruitment easier for a recruiter. Recruitment's often been done in a manual way in the past, and actually it's very time consuming. There's a lot of room for human error. You might miss a CV that's been emailed to you. It goes to your junk email and you've not spotted it. They could be an amazing candidate. And, for human error, you've not managed to spot that for some reason. And essentially with an applicant tracking system, all the information will be uploaded into one system. So for us as a recruiter, it's much easier to manage and track candidates.
Cool. Okay, so ultimately an ATS is there to kind of keep all the CVs together, all the applicants together, and you can track them. I guess the next stage that some employers use is it to scan CVs. So in your experience, have you ever used that part of an ATS? Have you used it where they scan through CVs?
Yeah, no, so I think there's a lot of conversation around how ATSs are being used. Again, they're quite a new phenomenon, so every recruiter is using them differently. In my experience with graduate recruitment, an ATS is being used, and the way that we use it is to track and monitor candidates' applications, to be able to communicate with them through one system, to be able to score them in one system, so it's easier for us to process and no one falls through the gaps. It's also a way for us to filter through unsuitable candidates. So in the past, when we haven't had a system like this, actually you have to just read through a candidate's application and a CV, and then you might get to the end and see that they don't have the right degree, for example, which could be a really key component. And actually, because they don't have a degree that is required for that job, you're not able to process them. Or perhaps there's they need a driver license for the job. There's often what we call key or killer criteria that candidates might need for a particular job. And actually the way that we've used applicant tracking systems is by having that killer criteria, you have a checkbox that you have to tick. If you have that, so for example, say you needed to drive to do this job, you would have to tick the box to say that you could before you then upload your CV or cover letter, for example. So for us as a recruiter, it means that we're then scoring candidates who we know we could progress rather than candidates we couldn't. So that's the way that typically we are using applicant tracking systems. There are companies out there that are using it to scan through to try and find keywords or key criteria that they are looking for particular jobs. I think, again, it's starting to be used, but I think a lot of the narrative out there is that it's, all candidate applications are being screened by robots or artificial intelligence. And actually that's just not the case, actually, especially for graduate recruitment. Typically, it is a person who might be looking over it. It might be filtered in a way like I've talked through the way that we do it. But often it is an actual person who's going to be looking and scoring. But as I said, the landscape around AI and applicant tracking systems is changing a lot. So, I could be saying this now, in a month, in 3 months, 6 months time, things could be really different. Stuff is progressing very quickly. But ultimately for us, it's about what is the most effective system so that we can find the best candidates for the job. And often at the moment, we're not using a scanning tool to do that. We're kind of getting that key criteria there, and then we're going through and we are the human scanners to see, have you got that key information? Have you ticked the kind of the key criteria that the job is outlined in their job description?
Okay, great. So the applicant tracking system's used for the tracking, the killer questions, so the specific key requirements of the job that you can straight away check for. You use that, which is more of a tick box. And then for you guys, it's real people actually read over the CV.
Yeah, so as I said, that's the way that we're doing it. But there are some companies who are using AI to screen or to filter. So, for example, Unilever, very big global company, they have thousands and thousands of applications every year for jobs. And I know that they have been using AI. I think that, for the last 5 years, they've been using that in terms of CV screening, in terms of kind of psychometrics and games, and also with video interviews. But again, it's what they're looking for. And actually, whether it's a human or artificial intelligence using a video interview, we're still looking for that key criteria. We're looking to see whether you as a candidate has met the competencies that we're looking for and provided a really good example of how you've met that competency or how you've developed that skill. So for a candidate, really, it doesn't matter too much, I would say, whether it is artificial intelligence or a human that's looking for it. It's about demonstrating how you are the best candidate for the job and tailoring your application to do that at each stage of the process.
So how does an applicant know what an employer is looking for? What should they be researching? What should they be looking at?
So I always say that a job description is kind of like a key or a code or a bit of a map, really. And actually most employers, not all, because obviously we encourage best practice amongst employers, but we know that there's still a lot of development out there in terms of the way that employers are communicating what they need from a candidate. But if you have got a good employer and they've got key criteria, normally that criteria that they're looking for a job will be on the job description under what we're looking for, or
a person specification, sometimes it's called, isn't it?
Exactly. Job description, person specification. The language changes, but really it's similar information. They're essentially saying this is what the job will entail on a day-to-day basis. These are the kind of roles and responsibilities you'll have. These are the kind of skills or competencies that we're looking for. And when it comes to those kind of skills and competencies that we're looking for, quite often that is what you'll be assessed against throughout the recruitment process. So if you're spotting things like communication, teamwork, resilience, agility, then you know that those are criteria that you're likely going to be assessed against throughout the recruitment process. So those are really the key words and key examples that you want to be getting across. So say we're looking for someone who's a really fantastic team member, then in your application, in your CV, in your video interview, whatever it is, you want to be communicating times that you can evidence when you are an effective part of a team. How are you an effective part of a team? How do you contribute to your team? How do you see that you as a person, you're not an individual, actually your work contributes to an overall goal? And so if one of you fails in your team, then you all fail. So how do you support other members of your team? All of those kind of skills are what we're looking for. So what I would say to candidates is always go through a job description, person specification really carefully, highlight those keywords, but also go and speak to your careers advisors. Again, they know what to look for as well, because they speak to employers all the time, they speak to recruitment specialists all the time. So again, they can also provide you with support in terms of trying to identify what criteria or competencies or skills someone is looking for. But also, I would also say, pick up the phone and call a recruiter, call an employer, because quite often they might even have what we call like a competency matrix. So some recruiters and graduate programs will actually have the competencies that they're looking for from their graduates publicly available. It might even be an attachment on the advert. So look out for those kind of things, because quite often employers give you a huge amount of information in terms of what they want from you. It's just about finding it, identifying it, and then tailoring your application to really demonstrate it.
That's really good. And yeah, like sometimes you get a lot of information on their websites as well, you can have a look at. And it's interesting you saying about keywords, because I see students a lot and they say, can you check over my CV, or an application form? Sometimes it might not be that a company might not be asking for a CV. They might want an application form and a supporting statement. But regardless, they say, can you check over it for this particular job? And I look at the job advert and the job description and the person specification, and I look at what they're asking for. And quite often they are missing those keywords, the things that an employer is asking for, because it might be communication skills, it might be teamwork. And quite often students say, oh, well, I just assume that they would assume that I've got that skill based on my experience. And I always say, don't assume anything. You have to explicitly say and name that skill and how you have it, like you were saying. And actually, if a CV is put through an applicant tracking system, it will be those same keywords that they're scanning for, aren't they?
Yeah, most likely, to try to pull out those prime examples. AI will be getting information from a person in terms of what they're looking for, the skills, the experience they're looking for, which will then be feeding into this ATS, and will be then scanning a CV in the same way that when I'm looking through a CV and I have competencies of teamwork, of communication, of resilience, of flexibility, I'll be looking for those keywords and then examples that also actually evidence it. Because what I also see sometimes on CVs is a bullet point of, I have teamwork skills, I have communication skills, which again, you can understand. I always say, you only know what you know. And actually, a lot of people are still learning a huge amount about CVs. So it's okay to get it wrong. It's about learning from those experiences where you haven't got through an application process, thinking, why might that be? Going to see your careers advisor. I'm aware that recruiters often don't have the time or the capacity to feedback at those earlier stages. So therefore, use the resources that you do have at your disposal to learn where you've gone wrong and how you can improve.
Yeah.
That's a really critical part of the learning and development process. But so highlighting those key skills and competencies, but evidencing them is really key. And then I would always just say, it's making it as clear and concise as possible. So imagine you're a recruiter and you have a minute to go through a CV, because you have hundreds of CVs to score and you have 2 days to score them and then get them through to the next process. Okay. So how can you as a candidate make it as easy as possible for me as a recruiter to see that you have got the key skills for the job, so that I can then tick it through and progress you? That's what we're looking for. So if you are kind of making it really convoluted, if you're adding in loads of graphics and images that may make it look really pretty, but actually make it really hard for me as a recruiter to extract that information, that's really difficult for me. That's much more time consuming for me as a recruiter. And sometimes you're actually not getting the key information across as a result. So I always just say to graduates, imagine that you have got 60 seconds to scour through your CV. Are you getting that key information across that's outlined in the job description or the person specification? And if you're not, go to your careers service and ask them for advice on how to best do it.
Brilliant. And thank you for the plug for the career service as well. Always good.
Always. I didn't use my career service as much as I could, and then I've ended up working in careers or adjacent to careers, and I'm like, why didn't I use my career service? They're so brilliant. There's so much information and tools and resources. So everybody, please go book an appointment with your careers advisor.
Thank you for that plug. Excellent. So yeah, we're looking at making it easy to read, scannable for a human or AI, whether it's the same kind of thing. and providing that evidence. So avoiding that list of, the skill, communication, teamwork, working under pressure, just that generic list, and actually giving evidence to that and using those examples. Now, what sort of examples can students use? So I know obviously we think about work experience and work, but other things that they could be using, drawing upon to show that experience. What have you seen students write about that you thought, oh, that's really great, that's really interesting?
That's a really good question. I think, so one of the things that we see for teamwork, for example, quite often in the recruitment process is students talking about, one time I was in a group project at university. Now, we understand because that's a prime example of teamwork, but actually quite often it's not the most creative example that you could use. And actually a huge amount of people have been a part of teams. You could be volunteering at a variety of organizations. You could be working in a cafe job. You could be part of a team, at school or at college or whatever, really thinking about a variety of examples. Quite often university students, I think, do just use university examples, but actually think about other jobs that you've done, other volunteering opportunities you've done, other teams you've been part of, sporting teams, whatever it might be, to really draw on different examples to show those variety of skills. So I think it's about drawing on a variety of experiences. I also encourage people, I think a lot of people focus on their academic studies, and that's really important, but actually I always say to people, get a part-time job, because actually, you gain so many skills and experience. One, you can earn money, which is great, but actually you gain really valuable skills and experience that then when you're going into the workplace is really critical in terms of demonstrating that variety of skills.
Mm-hmm.
Actually academia is wonderful, but it can be limited in terms of providing examples that a recruiter is looking for in terms of, that teamwork, that resilience. So I think, again, drawing on not just academic examples is really key. That's often one of the things I would say that we see a lot of is just university or academic examples, but actually we want to see a variety. Again, it's about saying, a recruiter doesn't know you. It doesn't know your skills, your strengths. So identify what are those skills, what are those strengths, have that conversation with yourself, with another person. What things do I do that you think are really interesting? What things, ask someone. We always say an exercise is ask a friend or ask a parent or a peer, what 3 words would you use to describe me? And doing those kind of activities to really draw out where your strengths and your skills are can be a really effective way of finding good examples to then demonstrate that to a recruiter in a recruitment process.
Yeah, excellent. And I think if there's students who are listening kind of going, oh, I don't have a part-time job, I don't do much, then start doing stuff, whether it is a part-time job or being, there's roles within universities. You can be student ambassadors, you can be student reps, you can join a society, have a responsibility in a society, volunteer with organisations, get involved in the student union. There's so much you can be doing on offer while at university, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I would say, so I'm a volunteer director for a not-for-profit. It's an unpaid role. But in terms of the experience that actually I've gained professionally, I've been running a large-scale annual event and managing a team of 20 people that live and work all over the country and working with a variety of stakeholders and funders. And that's a really huge thing. And that's voluntarily, that's not a paid job.
And you're doing that even as a professional,
Yeah.
aren't you? You're not a student.
I'm not a student anymore. No, I think I always encourage people to volunteer because I think it's good for your community. Actually, we need more people to be involved in our community, but also you get so much back from it, not just in terms of, human satisfaction from supporting other people, but also in terms of the skills that you can develop that will then really inform your careers going forward. You might also find something that you love that you didn't know. There's a huge amount, I'm very aware there's a huge amount of people out there who are studying a degree who will be really focused on doing really well in that degree, but that degree might not have been as great as they necessarily thought it was. It might not have actually suited them as much as they thought it was, and it might not have a really obvious career output. So then explore different things. Again, it's, there are so many different roles within your university, within your local community that you can do, that you can absolutely manage around your academic commitments, you can absolutely manage that. And again, for us as a recruiter, if we see that you're a graduate or a student who has done a job, a part-time job alongside their degree, alongside some volunteering, that tells me so much about your ability to manage your time effectively, to work with teams, to deliver on your roles and responsibilities, to be resilient, to manage multiple tasks. Again, that's telling the recruiter really, really important information about you. So again, I really encourage you. Obviously, your kind of academic career is incredibly important, and doing well in your degree is really important, but also thinking about, university is not just about your degree. There's so many other things at your disposal when you are a student, that it's really important to get involved in. And again, as a recruiter, you'll develop really valuable skills from doing that.
Great advice. So making the most of your time and then reflecting that in your CV, or like we said before, if it's not a CV, it'll be an application form, or during the video interview, using those experiences and again providing that evidence of what they're asking for. Really, really important. Let's just come back a little bit to the format of a CV. We kind of touched on it, but in terms of a CV, 1 page, 2 pages, what do you see typically, and what do you prefer?
So I get asked this question a lot when I'm doing face-to-face workshops with students, and the honest answer is I don't care as long as I'm getting the key information that I need in order to progress you. As you said earlier, recruiters will give you often the information that they need you to know, and it's about reading that information. Some employers will say, I want a 1-page CV, and so then you have to have a 1-page CV, and that's hard work, and I appreciate that is hard work. It's a lot of you're having to try and find a way to make your work experience, your professional experience, your academic experience very, very concise, but while still evidencing the skills. So I appreciate that can be a real challenge, but if that's what a recruiter is asking from you, that's what you need to do. Again, go to your careers advisors for CV advice when it comes to that. But typically with a CV, I would say, 1 page or 2 is fine, as long as you're formatting the information in a way that's clear for me as a recruiter to read. Again, the formatting thing really varies from recruiter to recruiter, but I would say that most people just want to know, have you got the skills and the experience in order for me to progress you through to the next stage? Do you have the required degree, if there is one? Do you have a driver's license if it's necessary? Do you have those teamwork, the communication, those resilience, those self-awareness skills? And what's a really brief, concise example of that? Have I got your key personal information? Have you done a kind of a really concise, really to the point, personalized brief introduction or kind of overview at the beginning? All of those kind of things is the same advice that careers advisors will be giving to students. It is exactly the same. It's making your CV as clear to read, as concise, and as tailored and personalized as possible. So whether that is 1 page or 2 page really doesn't matter. It's about the content and making it as easy to read as possible.
Yeah. And some people use tables or columns. They use sometimes templates. And I know with some, again, because you've talked about with early careers, often the screening tool on applicant tracking systems, they aren't always used, but potentially more experienced roles, maybe some mature students might be applying for experience roles. If an applicant tracking system and the screening is used for that, then it can be good to think about the format and being just mindful that some applicant tracking systems, from what I understand, they don't always, columns and tables don't always bode well with those systems. Sometimes, but again, even that varies, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It varies employer to employer, and as we said, so when it comes to ATSs and to that kind of CV screening, from our experience and speaking to kind of colleagues in the sector, it is often more senior roles where they might be using AI to score, essentially because it's actually easier to draw out key technical skills or knowledge or experience at that stage. That actually is slightly harder with graduate careers, when it's kind of an early careers, slightly more non-linear and slightly more kind of skills based. And I suppose examples of those kind of slightly broader skill sets. Again, I would say that the majority of CVs I've seen when there have been columns and tables haven't been as easy to read as when there are headings and bullet points, personally. And I would say most of my colleagues feel the same. Occasionally I've come across a CV where they have used columns and it looks really smart, the information's really clear, and it works really well. But actually, typically, I would say that they can hinder my ability to score a candidate clearly and quickly. So personally, I think simple is best. Again, it's just about getting that key information across to the recruiter in a really short amount of time that they have to go through your application.
Yeah, and I agree. Like some CVs with columns are okay, but they tend to be the ones that maybe have got very simplistic kind of information in one of the columns, and then the bulk of it in the main section. It's when, for me, when I'm reading 2 columns with loads of information, and I'm like, I don't know where my eye should go. I don't know where to read. So that's why I prefer that kind of more of a simple CV.
Yeah, absolutely. I think myself and majority of my colleagues who run large scale recruitment campaigns where we're screening, hundreds of CVs would say the same. We just want to know the key information and be able to score that as quickly and effectively as possible.
And you talked about bullet points, which can be really useful to make it very clear rather than large chunks of writing.
Absolutely. Ultimately, it's just, if there's really dense text, it's harder to pull out the key information, again, that we're needing in order to progress candidates. It is, I often say, and not to reduce the process, but it is often a bit like a tick box exercise. We have a list of the criteria that's called a scoring matrix that we're often having to look at and mark your CV against to see if you have got the skills and the experience that is needed in order for us to progress you. So quite often it is a bit of a tick box exercise. So again, if that information is headed, emboldened, you've got the keywords emboldened, and then you've got a bullet point of kind of a really brief, really concise example of where you've demonstrated that for me is amazing. It's so much easier to be able to go through and just identify that you have highlighted those key skills.
It's always bearing in mind someone is going to be reading through lots and lots, hundreds of CVs. Make it easier for them. Make life easier.
Exactly. Think like a recruiter. That's what we always say. Imagine it from our perspective. Here's what we are looking for, and here's how you can do that. So, think like a recruiter. Imagine that you are looking at your CV. You're a recruiter. You've got the key criteria or skills that are outlined in the job description, and you need to try and tick that off. Can you do that for your CV? I think that's a really quick, easy exercise for anyone listening to this to do and see, okay, have I made this easy for a recruiter to progress me?
It'd be good to wrap it up with a few mistakes you often see that students or graduates make when they're applying. So are there specific mistakes that you kind of see and think, oh no, not again?
So I was running a workshop quite recently in Liverpool, and I got asked this question, and we were talking to the students. We were saying, lots of students, lots of graduates say that they haven't heard back from employers. They've had numerous rejections. They're just not having that much luck. And then I ask them, how many of you have used the same CV to apply to multiple jobs? And most people in the room put their hands up. And that's it right there, really. The biggest thing that I can advise students and graduates when they are creating a CV is to tailor it to the job that they're applying for, to the company they're applying for. Personalize it, because as recruiters, I've seen CVs where it's been for another job has been in the header. It's
Oh no.
I know how difficult it is. I've been in the market. When you've been applying for jobs and you don't hear back, and it's really tough. And I appreciate that. It is really hard when you're not hearing it back. So again, it's about thinking about the key things that will really help you try to do better and have as little rejection as possible, because rejection is inevitable. It's an inevitable part of the recruitment process. And I always say that actually it's a really key part of the learning process when it comes to applying for jobs as well. And that's okay. It's about learning from it. So I suppose to kind of flip your question round slightly, and rather than talk about the mistakes, I'll kind of flag the things that I think are really essential for graduates and students to think about. So what I would say is look at jobs that fit with your values, that fit with your interests and some of your experience. But I think that those values and interests are really important, because actually then again, when you're tailoring that application, you'll have some really great examples that actually apply to this job, and you'll have a real genuine desire to work for this job, and you're not going to be faking or lying in order to kind of make your experience fit with a job, which again, we often can tell when that's happening. So I always encourage people, look for those values, look for those interests, read the kind of the day-to-day roles and responsibilities. Does that actually interest you? And try to apply for the jobs that genuinely interest you. Another thing that I would say is, again, just tailor your application, do some research into the company you're applying for, and include some of that research in your application, whether that is in that paragraph at the top of your CV, if they're just asking for a CV, or whether it's in a cover letter. Basically, research equals passion is what we always say. So if an employer wants to see that you're passionate about the job or the sector, do the research and prove it, and go beyond the website. Look beyond just the website. Go on the LinkedIn, read some articles, read some profiles, have a look at their recent strategy review or their recent kind of diversity and inclusion policy. Have a look at those key things. I would say be honest and be realistic about your skills. Again, graduate recruiters aren't looking for everything or the whole package. So again, it's about pulling out what really key things are they looking for, and absolutely do not lie on your CV.
Don't want to be lying.
And actually, I used to work for a company, Prospects, who would work around degree fraud, and actually it is a thing. It is fraudulent if you lie on your CV. That's a really key thing for graduates to know, because it is quite common as well. So just do avoid that. Format clearly and check your spelling. There are multiple spelling and grammar errors. That to me says that you don't have attention to detail. And kind of the final really key piece is, actually you'll have far more success with fewer really well-researched applications than with a really high volume of one standard CV, one-click applications with a generic CV that you kind of just throw out to hundreds of different jobs. Actually, you're more likely to get rejection that way than you are if you spend more time researching really thoroughly, tailoring that application for a job that actually interests you. And I know it's more time consuming. It is more time consuming. And then it can be even more frustrating when you don't get it. But actually your chances of getting through to those next stages will be far, far higher than those one-click application processes.
Yeah, brilliant. That is all such useful information and advice. And yeah, I agree. I see it quite often where students will say, I haven't heard back. And then you realize that they're sending the same CV to 100 companies, not tailoring it. And you just think, oh, that's probably why. And I urge all students and graduates, and actually even if you're professionals, anyone, to do that. It doesn't really matter who you are, just to tailor, to take that time over those applications. Thank you so much, Ellen. I really appreciate you coming on and to talk about your experience. And I think it's brilliant to hear from a recruiter's perspective, because you are the person, well, one of the people who are looking through CVs and applications. So it's so useful just to hear from your perspective.
Absolutely.
Some do's and don'ts, and how to really optimize your chances of getting to that next stage. So yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening today. Please remember to subscribe and follow so you can keep up to date with all new episodes.